Okay, with that, let's get kicked off, everyone. Thank you so much for joining tonight's session. I'm super, super excited to talk about, honestly, one of my favorite topics of all time, which is networking. And networking is perhaps the most overlooked thing in recruiting. I don't care if you're looking at private equity or investment banking or something else. People just don't spend enough time, enough effort, enough care on this, and they fail as a result. Because networking does several really, really cool things for us. First, it helps you learn what the hell you want to do with your job and your life. Second, it helps you figure out about specific firms and positions that you're excited about and you potentially want to work with. Third, it helps you build advocates. And so you start building relationships with people such that they want to support you in the interview process. And then fourth, and finally, and this is one that people forget about, it helps you to practice. And so I don't care how good you are at your behaviorals or how good you are about walking through your resume. The best way to practice is just to get out there and do it, to build those relationships and try and convince people to hire you. And so that is what we're going to be talking about today, is how to get people to want to give you a job. So with that, let me give you just a quick context on who I am and why I am teaching this. So my name is Max. I worked in investment banking at Lazard and Qatalyst and in private equity at Vector Capital. And now I'm currently an MBA student at Stanford and an MPA student at Harvard. And yes, that does mean that I have to fly back and forth between Boston and Palo Alto constantly. It's a logistical nightmare, but I love to do it. So I have been on both sides of the table for the last, 7 or so years. I've been an interviewer where I've interviewed probably 200 plus candidates. And I've also been an interviewee where I have interviewed for hundreds of jobs and done hundreds of interviews, hundreds of networking calls. And so I eat my own cooking here. You can rest assured that everything I'm going to teach you tonight is something that I personally implement almost every day. And I really think that this matters, especially in private equity. Because although there are hundreds of private equity firms relative to maybe dozens of banks, each role is way more competitive. And so whereas a bank will take on, 10, 20 candidates, a PE firm will take on 1 or 2. And so in order to be the 1 or 2, you have to, absolutely crush your behaviorals. You have to absolutely crush your technicals and your modeling tests. We can talk about all that later one-on-one. But really, you have to get the interview in the first place, and you have to have advocates who care about you and who want you to succeed. And that is harder to do than to say. And so we're going to talk about how to do that. And there's really 2 channels that this takes place in. The first channel is through headhunters, also known as recruiters. And the second channel is through your own proprietary individual networking. So that's the structure. That's the why. This matters. This matters a whole lot. And there's 2 ways we do it. So the headhunters and the proprietary networking, we're going to start out by talking about our beloved private equity headhunters. So for those of you who aren't familiar with the way that private equity recruiting works, it often involves middlemen, which are headhunters, which are agencies that are hired by the private equity firms to help them hire. And, I can send you a full list of these if you just message me afterwards. There's, probably about a dozen headhunters, and I've got a list of a few hundred clients that they cover. So please just set up an intro call if you want access to that list. But there are firms like Ratio, Henkel, Dynamics. You may have even talked with some of them. And it's kind of funny how heavily used they are in private equity. I think for me, it really comes down to the fact that PE professionals are ultra busy. And so they just don't have time to do the hiring and the recruiting. But it also really matters that you get the right person in your firm because you pay these candidates so much. Like these are very, very well compensated jobs, as I'm sure you know. Otherwise, you wouldn't be doing, a session on this at 9 p.m. Eastern on a Tuesday night. And so as a result of that, you have to make sure that you get your hiring right. So this is what the headhunters are. And there's a lot of other ones out there. And the only thing that I have to remind my clients constantly is be vigilant. Because it's kind of funny, these headhunters, they often reach out extraordinarily early in your investment banking or consulting career or whatever you're doing. Typically, they'll start reaching out before you even hit the desk, before you even start as an investment banker. And they really are very friendly generally. They're very sociable, they're very nice. They try and convince you that they're your friend, but ultimately they are very judgmental at the same time. They're evaluating you and you get one shot to impress them. And it's actually kind of scary to interact with a headhunter because normally when you're doing an interview, if you mess it up, you lose out on one job. If you mess up a headhunter interview, though, you lose out on like 20 jobs. All of their clients are no longer going to be an option for you. And so the way that it typically happens is it starts with a coffee chat. And so typically, you're going to start getting some emails prior to starting in banking or prior to starting in private equity or starting in consulting or something like that. Or maybe you'll reach out to them and they're going to usually say like, hey, we'd love to get to know you. We'd love to understand what you're interested in. And you'll set up some sort of phone call or an in-person meeting if you live in a major metro area. So you've got to make sure that you're prepared. And so first off, like make sure that you know who you're talking to, you know what their firm is, you know what clients they represent. And again, please feel free to set up an intro call if you need a list of their clients. And you need to also make sure that you've got a solid focus here. And so when I say your focus, what I mean is what you're actually recruiting for. And there's a concept that they teach us here at Stanford called optimal distinctiveness, where you want to be distinctive enough to capture their attention and show the headhunter that you're a serious candidate with serious goals, but not so specific as to be unreachable. And so let me give you an example. When I was first interested in private equity and investing, like at first I had no clue what I actually wanted to do. And so I started talking with my friends and I was like, yeah, I might want to do venture, but growth seems pretty cool. And, if there was a mega fund, I wouldn't say no. And in terms of geography, I guess, like maybe New York or San Francisco or Chicago or LA could be cool. You get the picture. So I was an absolute joke. If you show up and talk to a headhunter like that, they're going to immediately throw your resume away and say, well, this person really doesn't know what they're looking for. Conversely, if you show up to the headhunter conversation and you're like, hey, I want to work at $2 to $4 billion AUM private equity firms that are exclusively focused on industrials and based out of Miami. They're going to be like, well, like, tough luck. I don't know who that is. I don't have any clients like that. And so again, that concept of optimal distinctiveness, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later on in tonight's session. So then the next thing, you want to make a good first impression. And so even if it's a Zoom call, I always recommend dressing up, wearing a suit and tie, a blazer, a nice blouse, something like that, a sports jacket, anything that you can to show that you take the serious conversation seriously and that you really care. And if it's an in-person interview, like make sure that you have a nice copy of your resume, not wrinkled, not coffee stained or anything like that, freshly printed out for them. Then the last thing you have to do with these early stage coffee chats is follow up effectively. And so there's really two times that you can follow up with a headhunter. The first time is if you update your resume. And so maybe you'll have a conversation, but then you'll get a new on-campus internship or you'll do a new stock pitch competition or something like that. You can send them a follow-up resume. And so you can say, hey, I just updated this, just wanted to make sure you had the latest on file. And by the way, any opportunities I should be aware of. Or the second time that you can follow up with a headhunter is if you start getting progress with another process. And so let's say that you're interviewing for like KKR and you start to get closer to the end of the process, you get like a super day or something like that. But really your dream job is at Blackstone. Then you could go to the Blackstone recruiter and you could say, hey, by the way, just wanted to let you know I'm in late stage rounds with another prestigious firm that Blackstone competes with. And Blackstone is my absolute number one pick. So I'd just love to talk with them at least before I have to accept an exploding offer. And that's a really, really powerful tool. It's tough to do. So if you're curious about how to effectively word that sort of thing or leverage that, again, let's talk. So that's the coffee chat. It's a first round, very evaluative interview with a headhunter that will either give you access to or block access to a dozen or more private equity firms. After that chat, they're going to make a decision. And they're not going to tell you whether they liked you or not. You may be able to pick it up a little bit based on body cues, but ultimately they'll say, hey, we like Max or we don't like Max. And at that point, when on-cycle recruiting hits, without any warning, you're going to have a deluge of emails from the headhunters who liked you. And so I say that it follows the 80-20 rule, which usually means that 80% of the opportunities and 80% of the leads are going to come from 20% of the recruiters. And so maybe one or two headhunter firms will really like you and they're going to send you a lot of stuff. And the thing about on-cycle recruiting, which again is hitting earlier and earlier every year, it'll probably hit during the summer that you start banking or consulting. They're going to just send you so many things that you really have to be clear on what your priorities are. Because if you don't know what your priorities are, you're not going to know whether to accept the interview when they call you to KKR or the interview that they call you to Blackstone. And so if you don't know what you want, you're not going to know which call to take and where to interview. But the honest truth is, because on-cycle recruiting is happening so early with private equity these days, a lot of people are doing off-cycle recruiting instead. And so off-cycle recruiting is just the long tail of processes that happen after on-cycle recruiting, everything from, stuff that happens that fall through the winter, throughout the first or second year of your banking process and or consulting process. And so it's important to make sure that you're actually building long-term relationships. These are not just one and done, random people that you're talking with. These are real relationships that you want to maintain throughout your career in finance. And so it's a little bit funny, I never thought that I would still be talking to all of these people that I built these relationships with. But 5 to 7 years later, after I did on-cycle recruiting, I'm still connecting with them. I'm still doing regular calls with some of these headhunters. And that's a really, really powerful relationship at this point. So invest in those relationships. Make sure that you're building strong ties. So that's how the headhunter process works. And before we talk about proprietary recruiting, I just want to make all of you aware of a resource. And for those of you who are feeling like, okay, all this networking is fine and good, but I still need some work on my behaviorals and technicals. And oh, by the way, what the hell even is private equity? I just wanted to let you know about a boot camp that I'm helping host in February. So for those of you who want to do a little bit more detail and get into some sessions on technicals and behaviorals and more detail on networking and things like that, go ahead, check it out. I thank you for sending that in the chat. There's a link in the chat and you can get started. It should be a really, really solid curriculum talking about recruiting, resumes, deal structures, investing frameworks, some LBO modeling, some behaviorals, and some paper LBOs. So if any of that looks interesting, go ahead, click the link on the chat. And I believe that there is a discount code for anyone who's joined this webinar. I may be wrong on that. We may be doing some sort of giveaway, but check the chat for that. Oh yeah, there we go. There's your discount code. Speak of the devil. So we'll talk a little bit more about that at the end. Just to remind you all, feel free to click that link. But ultimately, and we will have a giveaway, it sounds like, for someone on this call tonight. So I'm looking forward to that. But the second thing that we need to talk about tonight is, of course, the proprietary networking. So we talked about headhunters. That's their own beast. But a lot of the networking that's really going to be valuable for you is the stuff that you do on your own. Not the stuff that's spoon-fed to you, not the stuff that you're going to get through a recruiter, but the stuff that you create the opportunity. And so that's what I mean by proprietary networking. And so within proprietary networking, you've first got to figure out, who am I going to email? You've got to figure out, how am I going to email them or message them somehow? And then third, how am I going to make it a good conversation? Like, how can I get them to like me and prepare for that conversation effectively? So let's start with the who. So the who here begins with understanding exactly the job that you want. And so one of the things that I love most about coaching is sitting down with people and students and early career professionals and saying like, okay, like, what do you want to do? Like, is growth a better fit for you, or do you want to work in a mega fund? Do you like working on value deals, or do you like investing in companies that are, growing 100% year on year and burning cash? Are you interested in the healthcare industry, or maybe you want to work in, industrials PE or something like that? Like, do you want to live in Chicago? Are you excited about the Bay Area? And so, if this is something that scares you and you don't know what you want to do, this is the place to start. And I'd love to help. So again, I'll send up some information for some free intro calls. Please get that signed up. Let's talk. But once you know who you want to talk to, then you've got to figure out like, what is that? Who are the people that actually operate in the segment I'm interested in? So let's say that, like me, you're interested in tech PE, usually in the mid-market area. That's my area of interest, historically. And so what I would do is I would then create a spreadsheet of the top, 50 or even 100 private equity firms that fit that description, because there are a lot of them, really, really good firms where you can get great experience as an associate that fit that bill. And so you want to build out a spreadsheet that has information on the firm. It has information on the location, the head count, the deals that they've worked on, all of that good information so that you know what you're talking about. And that's going to come in handy on those headhunter calls. So let's say that, a headhunter, calls you up and you have the conversation. They say, hey, there's 2 or 3 positions that we're looking at hiring. One's at Sarant Capital, one's at Parthenon Capital, one's at, let's call it Abry Partners. If you just stare there blankly and you're like, huh, what are those? They're never going to give you the interview. But if they say, oh yeah, Parthenon or something, you're like, oh, actually, yeah, I talked with 2 or 3 people from Parthenon a couple weeks ago. It seems like they've got a really interesting thesis in financial services and healthcare investing, which are sectors that I'm really interested in. I saw some of their deals and I'd love to get connected. Obviously, you're going to get the interview at that point. And so do your homework, understand what your market looks like. Then, once you understand the firms that you want to talk with, you've got to figure out the people that you want to talk about. And so you've got to determine the actual professionals that you want to reach out to. And so for most of you, that means that you're going to have to get LinkedIn Pro. It's $100 a year or something like that. And you're just going to be really, really doing a lot of research on LinkedIn over the next few months. And so the place that you want to start, though, is not with people on LinkedIn. You want to start with people that you already know. And so think through your list of friends and family members and friends of friends and family friends and cousins and whoever else, and see if you can think of anyone who is working in banking or who has worked in banking. And for some of you, that might not be a long list. And for me, like I didn't know anyone. But for others of you, you're going to have a really strong set of people that you can reach out to with very low stakes. Take advantage of that. But for most people, you're going to burn through that list pretty quickly, and you're going to need to start reaching out to people that you don't actually have all that much of a connection to. And so what you're going to need to do is you're going to need to start reaching out to people that have some sort of other type of connection with you. So maybe they went to the same school as you, or maybe they did the sort of same ice hockey team as you, or they volunteer at the same organization, or they're on the board of directors of like a nonprofit that you think is really cool. Anything you can find that gives you some little hook to overlap with. And then if you get truly desperate, you can do cold outreach. But I really don't recommend that for most of my clients, because at the end of the day, the results are pretty poor. You're going to get maybe a 10% response rate, and it's pretty discouraging. And so for most people, they can stick to the best and the better categories, the people that they know and the people that they have went to school with and things like that, instead of doing some of this cold outreach. So this is who you should be talking with. Hope that makes sense. And the next thing that we're going to spend quite a bit of time talking about is like just how to actually do the outreach. And so it starts with a really, really damn good cold email. And this is something that I have worked on for years and years, and I'm excited to share what I've learned. But a couple of other logistical things before we get there. It also means that you've got to have really solid outreach tools. And so if you haven't used it, tools like Rocket Reach, Hunter.io, ZoomInfo, Apollo.io, SourceScrub, they help you find the emails that you need. And so you type in someone's name, you type in their bank, and it helps you figure out like what is their actual email address. Then the next thing, and this is a game changer for a lot of people, you need to get an email tracker. And so for those of you who don't know what that is, an email tracker is basically a piece of software that sits on top of your Gmail or your Outlook or something like that, that helps you see if someone actually opened your email. And that's critical because if you are talking with someone and you're trying to get a hold of them and you send them 5 emails and they don't get any responses, it may just be that like it went to spam or it bounced. And so if you don't have an email tracker, you're not going to see that, oh, in fact, they did open it and they just didn't respond because maybe your message wasn't compelling enough. So get an email tracker, get access to these tools, and then from there, it's really just a volume game. And so one of my biggest roles as a coach for people breaking into PE is helping them stay accountable for a huge volume of outreach. Most people are going to reject you. And so in order to get the volume of calls and connections that you need, you probably need to send upwards of 10 emails a day. And so it's a pretty big volume game. And as a result of that, a lot of people, they get sloppy, they get disorganized, and they're not going to be able to effectively follow up with these people or remember when and how they talked to them. And so the next thing that you need to do is create an outreach spreadsheet. And so in my outreach spreadsheet, I've got something like the name of the person, the firm that they work at, their title, maybe their geography. And then I have a column that says, okay, first email, second email, LinkedIn request, third email, fourth email, blah, 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 call, et cetera, et cetera. So stay organized, get a good spreadsheet going. It can even be in the same spreadsheet as this like firm mapping list. Okay, so with no further ado, let's get you to a cold email. And so, like I said, I've been working on this cold email template for probably the last 6 or 7 years, and I actually first built it in sales when I was working in software sales, doing like $1 million sale deals. And the reason that I like this template is because salespeople tend to be the best emailers in the world. They have to convince you to give you money. And so if they can send a good email, anyone can. And this is what that looks like. It's deceptively short. And so a lot of you are probably like, what the hell? Like, this is a big letdown. It's like 3 sentences. And that's kind of the point. Because the thing about bankers and private equity people is they just don't have time to read a long email. And so most of the time when a student emails me and I get like 5 paragraphs of text in there, like I kind of just like don't even have time to look at it. And so I would love to chat with this person, but a lot of the times I just have to delete the email because it's too cumbersome. But this email is short, it's sweet and to the point, and there's 5 things that are going on here. So the first thing is a hook. When I say a hook, I mean that first email sentence here, the sentence that really gives you a tie-in to the other person. So most candidates, they start their cold emails with something like, hope you had a good break or Happy New Year or something like that. And that works, but it's not strong. It's not nearly as strong as when you send an email that has something like, congrats on the VP promotion or congrats on a 5-year mark at JP Morgan, or nice work switching from Silver Lake to KKR. I hope that transition's been going well. I don't care exactly what it is. It could be a deal. It could be an anniversary. It could be a job transition, but something that brings the conversation to them. Because again, people like to talk about themselves. They like to be noticed and they like to be complimented. And so if you can do that effectively, that's going to be a really compelling hook. Then once you've got them reading, you include just a teensy bit about yourself. Most people spend way too much time on this section. They spend like 5 paragraphs, giving every single detail of their work history. They give their, their background, where they grew up, their siblings. They talk about their grandma. Like, no, 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 none of that. Like, none of that. It's not about you. It's about the other person. And so you just need one sentence that says, what's your school? What are you doing? And what are you trying to do? And so for me, that's simply, I'm a Stanford MBA student seeking to break into private equity. Then the third session or letter or less or third sentence here is the tie. And so you've got to explain not just who you are, but like why you reached out to them specifically. And so for me, depending on the person that I'm reaching out to, that could be, you're talking with someone in technology, or maybe you're talking with someone who does industrials, whatever it is, just customize a little bit and say, tech is my area of focus and nobody does that better than your firm. So there's a little bit of flattery, a little bit of tie-in, and a little bit of relevance. And then finally, you finish with a strong call to action. If your sentence in your paragraph does not end with a question mark, you're doing it wrong. You'd not believe how many people email me and they send something, it's a great email, and then they finish with a period. And I'm like, well, like, what were you asking for? Like, I didn't actually see an ask in there. And so it's really important to make it clear that like you are in fact asking for something, and make it very clear what that is. And so for me, I usually finish my emails with something like, I'd love to hear about your experience, at Morgan Stanley so far, or at, Blackstone so far. Do you have a minute to chat next week? And in fact, I should probably update this. Like, I think that it would be even better if instead of saying, do you have a minute to chat next week, you say, do you have a minute to tack next Tuesday or Wednesday? And this is important because it changes the question from can you talk to when can you talk? And that's an important distinction that a lot of people miss, but you see the difference there. It's important. Okay. That's the email. Last thing I'll just say is you need to make sure that there's some context. And so don't just have the email, also include your resume in PDF. You don't need to acknowledge it in the email, but just include the resume as a PDF, include a LinkedIn, and then I also like to include a Calendly link, which for those of you who don't know, it's just like a simple link that you click on and you can like automatically book a 30-minute call or something like that. And some people that I try and network with, they just click the link and they book something without even talking to me first. And that's great. It saves us all time and we still have a great call. So that's the email. If you have any questions about that, I would love to hear them at the end. So please be thinking. Feel free to take a screenshot of this. Then last but not least, let's talk about how this fits within the outreach cadence. Because for anyone that you actually want to talk to, you can't just send one email. You've got to send multiple. And so if you want to talk with someone really bad, the way that you do it is you start with an email like I just sent. So this page, send them that email, wait a week, and send them a simple reminder email. And so that reminder email usually goes something like this. It's like, hey, Jack, I know things have been really busy. I'd still love to hear about your experience at Partners Group. Any chance you have a time to talk next Wednesday? So doesn't need any customization, super fast to write, and very easy to just follow up on the first one. Then if you still haven't heard back from them, I'd recommend sending them a LinkedIn note. And you can use this exact same email in a LinkedIn message because it usually fits within the 300 characters or whatever that they give you for an intro connection. And so 1, 2, 3, week 0, week 1, week 2, space it out, give them a chance to reply. And then if you really get desperate, I've got some other creative ideas on how to engage people. But I don't think we need to talk about those tonight because for 90% of people, it's better to send 10 emails to 10 different people than 10 emails to one person. So spread it out. Again, this is a volume game. You really, really want to just maximize the number of people that you're talking to. So with that, let's talk about how to actually have a successful call, because a lot of people forget about this part. They don't get this right. And what was all this work about how to email people and who to email if not actually preparing you for an effective call? So first thing that I'll just say is you've got to show up prepared. You can't just show up and like wing it. That might work sometimes. And as you get more experience, you can do a little bit less preparation, but you always want to research at least the firm. And so the firm research, again, hopefully that sounds familiar. It's all this stuff that we're talking about with the mapping out firms. So you've already done your firm research at this point, but you've also got to research the individual. And so this is where you spend some serious time on LinkedIn, just like remembering and like writing down and saying, okay, here's where they went to school. Here's they went to undergrad. Here's where they, they were on the basketball team. They coached the little league soccer. They work at this nonprofit on the side. Okay, great. I understand who they are. And that's important because then you're going to have a good idea of how you can connect with them. And we'll come back to that in just a second. Then the last thing that you need to do in preparation for each call is just make sure you know who you've talked to that they might know. Maybe you have a connection in common, or maybe you actually already talked to them a few months ago, or you talked to someone in their group or on their team a few months ago. That sort of stuff is really important just for your context, so that when you show up on the call, you don't make a fool of yourself. And I recently made the mistake of forgetting this point a couple months ago. And I was reaching out to this guy that I was super excited about at a really cool private equity firm. And I sent him an email and I got on the call. And then as soon as I got on the call, I was like, oh crap, we talked 3 weeks ago. And so it turns out I'd actually had 2 calls with this guy in the space of a month. And I'd totally forgotten that I'd already done that recently. And it was really embarrassing at first. I was able to recover and I was able to make it a really solid conversation. But I would have done much better if I'd had that context going. Okay. That's how you prepare. Then when you actually show up on the call, it goes something like this. So you typically start with small talk. And this is something that a lot of people neglect. A lot of people just skip past that and they don't spend any time trying to actually build the relationship. But if you think about networking, at the end of the day, it's just really just about building relationships with people. And so if you skip the small talk, you're not going to have that basis of connection that enables them to like you and to want to advocate for you. So once you spend maybe 2 to 3 minutes on small talk, don't force it if they're not interested, but engage with it for as long as they want to. Then you get into your thesis statement, is what I call it, which is the point where you transition it from small talk into a networking call. And so just to show you how that sounds, it goes something like this. It's like, oh, that's so great to hear about your lake house at Tahoe. It sounds like you must be super jet lagged after flying back last night. So I really appreciate the fact that you're willing to take the time to talk. And I'm happy to give you a little bit more background on myself, but mostly I just want to hear about you and your time at CD&R, because I really love Clayton, Dubilier and Rice, and I think it's a great private equity firm, and I want to hear about your experience. Okay, so that's a transition. It starts with the small talk, it transitions it into the context. And an important point there is that it gives them the option, but not the obligation to hear about you. And so again, that wording was something like this. It's like, oh, I'm happy to share about myself, but mostly I want to hear about you and your experience. And so that's great because again, people like to talk about themselves more than they like to talk about you mostly. And so if you give them the opportunity to just immediately jump into talking about themselves, you can sometimes skip that sort of background about you. And then from there, it's usually just asking questions, being smart, and pressing them with the thoughtfulness of your questions. And so on the questions, a couple guidelines. First off, if you can find it on Google, it's a bad question. Never ask them oh, what's your AUM, or what deals has the firm done recently, or how's fundraising going, or something like that. Those are things that you can figure out online. Second, make sure that you have about 1 question for every 2 to 3 minutes on the call. So if you're trying to have, a 20-minute call, make sure that you've got 5 to 10 pretty solid questions so you don't run out. And then third, ask questions that invite them to tell stories. And so instead of just following up and, grilling them on yes or no things do you like your job? Do you like sourcing? Do you like execution? Do you like portfolio company maintenance? Do you work in technology? Do you work in industrial? Blah, blah, blah. No. Ask them questions like, tell me about what your favorite part about your job is. Or, yeah, I'd love to hear a story about the latest deal that you've worked on and how you strategically positioned yourself to win it. Those are good questions because they're going to invite them not just to say yes or no or a quick answer or something like that. They're going to really invite them to tell a meaningful story. And then you want to ask as many follow-ups as possible to those things, because follow-up questions tend to be a little bit more natural and better for the conversation than yes or no's and other things. Then lastly, and most importantly, is the ask. And so if you've been falling asleep on this session right now or whatever, wake up. This is the time to pay attention. This is the most important point we're going to talk about tonight, is how to ask for something at the end of the call. And the reason this is important is because people really suck about asking for things. They do all this work to get someone on the phone. They do a great conversation. And then they say, thank you for your time. Hope you have a great rest of your day. Hang up. No. If you didn't ask for something at the end of the call, you just wasted your time and you wasted their time. And so you want to ask for three things. You want to ask for a job. If they don't have a job, you want to ask for a referral to someone else. And if they don't have a referral, you want to ask for their mentorship. And so typically it will go something like this. And I'd love to mock this out with you. And so please, again, book some time. Let's do an intro call and we can talk through this. So otherwise, though, it'll look something like this. It'll be like, oh my gosh, okay. Well, thank you so much for taking the time. It was super cool to hear about that deal you just worked on. Like I said, I think that, Vector Capital is absolutely my #1 private equity firm that I'd love to work with. Are you aware of any opportunities opening up for associates next year? Oh, no. Oh, no, no worries. No worries. I totally understand. I know it's a busy job market. So they didn't say yes to the job. Then you ask for a referral. You say something like this. Well, that said, I'd still love to keep learning about Vector. Is there anyone else on your team that you'd recommend I reach out to? So you're asking for a referral, but you're asking for it lightly. And so you're not pressuring them. You're not saying, give me a referral, give me a warm intro. You're saying, is there anyone you recommend I reach out to? And if they say yes to that, great. If they say no to that, then you say, no worries. I know that things are busy and the team must be pretty swamped right now. That said, your support and your mentorship have been super helpful. I'd really love to stay in touch. Is it okay if I keep you updated on my progress over the next couple months? And realistically, nobody's going to say no to that. And so again, first, ask for the job. If they don't have a job, ask for a referral to someone else. If they don't have a referral, ask for their continued support. And one of those three things they're probably going to say yes to. And if they give you a job, great. Mission accomplished. If they give you a referral, great. You don't have to send another cold email. If they give you mentorship, great. You can follow up and build a relationship again in a couple months. So you win regardless. Okay, that's important. Screenshot this. Take notes on that. Let's talk about it one-on-one. Then the last thing about these calls is don't forget the thank you note. And so typically I say, send it as soon as you can, but at a minimum, send it within 24 hours and have a specific reference back to the call. Show that it's not just generic. For example, on the call that I was mocking out earlier, I would say, glad that you made it back safely from Tahoe. I hope the skiing was great and I really appreciate you taking the time. So a specific anecdote that ties back to the call that shows that you were paying attention. And then you want to have some sort of sentence that follows up on the asks that you had. And so if they agreed to refer you to 3 people or something, they're like, oh yeah, actually, let me put you in touch with, Yolanda and Jill and Liz or something like that. Then you want to say, oh, thank you so much for agreeing to introduce me to Liz and Yolanda or whatever. Please let me know if you need any help with that. And I've attached my resume. Okay. So that's the thank you email. Now, before we open it up to a few minutes of Q&A, I just want to share a little bit about why this matters and do our giveaway. I want to share about why this matters. So some of you may not be convinced that it's worth spending time on networking because it takes time. It is grueling. It is grindy. You will get rejected left and right. It's painful, but it's worth it. And so when I was doing on-cycle recruiting way back in the day, I'm dating myself by saying this. I was really excited about this one just massive private equity firm. And so I'd done tons of networking there. I'd reached out to a dozen people. And when the time came for the on-cycle recruiting, I didn't get the call. And I was devastated. I was like, oh crap, all my friends are interviewing with this firm, but somehow the headhunter just didn't like me, I guess. And so instead of giving up, I emailed all 10 of the people that I'd already talked with. And I said, hey guys, I know that you're interviewing tonight and this is my number one firm. I would be extremely excited to participate in the process. Is there any way that I can at least have an intro conversation? And within, I kid you not, within probably like 15 minutes of sending those emails, the headhunter gave me a call at like 9 p.m. on a Sunday night. And they were like, Max, like, I don't know what the hell just happened, but like get down to their office like immediately in the next 15 minutes if you can. And so then I spent the rest of the night, all night long, interviewing, doing case studies and things like that. And so this works, folks. This stuff works. And I promise you that when you invest in recruiting and networking, you're going to get results. And so if it's not working for you, let's talk through how to do it effectively. But for next steps, I want you to go and think about your strategy. I want you to go think about who you want to reach out to. And then I want you to reach out to me if you found these materials helpful. Schedule an intro session. I'm happy to share either that headhunter list or some of these materials and have a call and just help you with your individual networking strategy. Now, with that, I'm happy to open this up to Q&A. We're going to do the giveaway, and then I'll let people run because I know we're almost at time. And so with that, Nick, I'm not sure if you want to pop out and let us know who the giveaway winner is.
Absolutely. The giveaway winner is Marley. Marley, super excited to have you in our upcoming private equity bootcamp. And for everyone else, you should have received a $1,000 discount code to the bootcamp as well. Again, Max, fabulous coach, will be one of the hosts at the bootcamp. Highly encourage you to join and also to set up an intro call with him. As you mentioned, I'll send the link to his profile here in the chat again.
Thank you, Nick. And congratulations, Marley. Excited to have you on there and keep talking about this. And for the rest of you, hope to see us as well. So before you hop off and we open up to just a couple minutes of Q&A here, please feel free to leave a review. If you need to leave now, that's totally fine. For the rest of you, please scan the link, set up an intro call. And with that, I'll open it up to 2 or 3 questions. So if you have a question, please feel free to either raise your hand and I'll call on you or just come off mute. Give it another 15 seconds. Any questions about how to network, how to interact with headhunters, how to interact with individuals, what to send in your cold emails, anything like that?
Can I jump in?
Please.
Hi, nice to meet you. I am Shreya. I am based in the UK. And this might not be the most industry specific question, but I have found myself at networking events or industry events face to face with people I know nothing about. They've just introduced themselves. They are in a role in a big company. I don't know their background. If I am faced with a situation where I don't have a lot of context of their interests and their work, how do you advise navigating something like that?
Yeah, well, Shreya, that is an excellent question. I'm sure a lot of people share on this call because that is the magic of in-person networking, which we didn't really talk about today. And it really comes down to a couple things. First off, it comes down to do you know the industry? Did you take your time to review who the firms are and who the potential sort of companies are that you could be talking to? And so as soon as you know where they work, you have a little bit of background on who they are that you can leverage. The second thing is making sure that you look prepared and you're well dressed and you're smiling and ready to go and brushed your teeth that morning or something like that. It's just making sure that you're bringing your best self to it. And then the final thing is just behaviorally, just being nice, being curious, being interested in other people. And so even if you don't really know a lot about them, showing up with a good sense of curiosity and being willing to ask them some questions about themselves will go a massive way, even if you're not the most prepared for the in-person one. That's a great question, Shreya, and we probably have time for maybe one more question if anyone has it. And Nico, I saw your question in the chat. Would you like to ask it out loud?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah, great to meet you.
Okay, great. Thanks so much for the time, Max. I was just wondering about on the cold email. You talked about using flattery. For example, you said nobody does that better than XYZ firm.
Yeah.
What if that firm is pretty objectively not the industry leader? Is there another nice thing that you can say instead, just so you can come across a little bit more authentic?
Exactly. Yeah, no, for sure. You've got to be sensitive to this sort of thing. And when I say flattery, I mean, don't overdo it. Like, obviously, you don't want to go out there and, compliment some lower middle market private equity firm on doing like all the biggest deals in tech or something like that. And so, what I would do instead is compliment them on what they are good at. And so, if you spend a few minutes on any private equity firm's website, you're going to start to see how they like to describe themselves. And so, maybe that lower middle market private equity firm doesn't do $10 billion tech deals, but maybe they do prioritize like a really founder driven, relationship driven approach. And so you could say something like, I want to work at a P firm with an excellent, relationship focused culture. And I know that nobody does it as well as your firm. And so it doesn't have to be like nobody does it as well as your firm. You could just say, and I know that that's a focus at your firm, or I know that your firm does that really well. But just something to indicate that you, A, know a little bit about who they are, and B, are impressed. That's all you're trying to get across there.
Got it.
With that, thank you for the question, Nico and Shreya. And I saw a couple more here in the chat from Ariana and Win. And so if you have these other questions, I'm so sorry, I do have to end now, but please reach out, set up an intro call, and I'd love to discuss them with you. Thank you all for joining so much. I really enjoyed our conversation, and I hope that you go out there and crush your networking goals. Have a great rest of your night.